The lecture hall of the Galactic Academy hummed with excitement. Today's topic was a special one: understanding conflict and warfare across species. Alien students from countless systems, each carrying centuries of cultural history, had gathered to learn about how different civilizations approached conflict, expecting tales of honor duels, strategic standoffs, and ceremonial battles. As they waited for the lecture to start, the usual chatter of exotic languages and bioluminescent signals filled the air, reflecting a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Among them sat Vrix, a member of the peaceful Zentravarian race, and Shra, an insectoid scholar from the warless Nebulon sector. They had little first-hand knowledge of warfare. To many of them, violent conflict was a relic of a more primitive past. But all were intrigued to learn about the bizarre, complex customs surrounding combat across the galaxy. As the lights dimmed, Professor Alara, a humanoid historian who specialized in comparative warfare, introduced a guest speaker, Cadet Benji Martin, the first Earthling at the Academy. The room fell silent as he began his presentation, a holographic display lighting up behind him with images from Earth's history. Benji had been chosen to present an overview of humanity's historical conflicts, and he could already sense the skepticism in the room. Many alien students knew Earth as a backwater world, an emerging society barely out of its solar system. The idea that humanity had mastered warfare, to them, seemed as implausible as it was amusing. Benji began with an overview of early human conflicts, explaining that human history was marked by an evolution of weapons, strategies, and philosophies surrounding war. He illustrated how tribes had once fought with stone tools for survival, competing over resources and territory, and how, over millennia, these skirmishes evolved into organized warfare. The display showed scenes from ancient battles, armies clashing with swords and spears, formations of armored soldiers marching toward certain death. He noted how some human wars were fought over ideology, others over resources, and still others for reasons barely comprehensible even to humans themselves. The class was riveted, both fascinated and disturbed by the early images, as wars over lines drawn on maps seemed alien to many of them. Then he moved on to humanity's more recent history, the era of industrialized warfare. The images changed to scenes from World Wars I and II, images of bombers streaking across skies, cities crumbling under heavy bombardment, and rows of soldiers trudging through mud-filled trenches. Alien students gasped in horror as he explained the concept of total war, the idea that entire nations, including civilian populations, became targets in an all-encompassing effort to dominate the enemy. Vrix, the Zentravarian, raised a hand, his voice quivering with shock. "Why would anyone choose to involve civilians?" he asked, bewildered. To many alien species, war was a matter of honor or an exercise in controlled conflict, kept away from non-combatants. Benji explained that, in human history, war sometimes overwhelmed societies to such an extent that no one was truly safe. When resources dwindled and survival was at stake, lines blurred between the battlefield and the home front. It was a bitter truth, he admitted, and one that had shaped humanity's deepest fears and regrets. When he reached the topic of nuclear warfare, the room grew still. The hologram displayed an image of an atomic explosion, the familiar mushroom cloud erupting with devastating force. He explained how, in the mid-20th century, humanity developed weapons capable of annihilating entire cities in seconds, wiping out millions of lives at once. The students recoiled in horror. Shra, the Nebulon scholar, could barely comprehend it. "Your species created devices to destroy your own world? And you used them?" she asked, her voice thick with disbelief. Benji nodded solemnly, recounting the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He described the unimaginable destruction, the horrific toll on human lives, and the haunting legacy that nuclear weapons had left on his world. These actions, he explained, had been taken to force an end to a brutal war, but the cost had been almost unbearable. The students around him whispered in shock. For many, the idea of weapons of such magnitude was beyond understanding. They had never known war to reach a point where its participants could annihilate entire populations, let alone risk the destruction of their own planets. As he continued, Benji noticed some students reacting with anger, others with sadness. He explained how the Cold War that followed had kept humanity under the constant threat of mutual destruction, and how leaders had used nuclear arsenals as deterrents, holding entire populations hostage to maintain peace. The concept of mutually assured destruction shocked his alien classmates. Rick spoke up again, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You mean you lived under the threat of extinction for decades? How could your people endure that?" Benji admitted that fear had permeated human life during those years, shaping art, literature, and even children's games. But humanity had learned to live with it. He explained that this period had also inspired movements for peace, with people coming together to protest, to fight against such terrifying power, and to ensure that leaders understood the cost of their choices. It was a testament to humanity's resilience, but also a sobering reminder of their capacity for destruction. Finally, Benji spoke of Earth's more recent conflicts and the struggles humanity faced today: civil wars, terrorism, the ethical dilemmas of drone warfare and cyber warfare, fights that didn't always involve visible battlefields but still carried massive consequences. The alien students looked at one another, absorbing the complexities of human warfare, the haunting mix of courage, desperation, and ingenuity that defined Earth's history of conflict. Some of them, like Shra, had been taught that such aggression was primitive, a vestige of a less enlightened time. But hearing Benji's story, they began to understand that humanity's experience with war was not merely a story of violence. It was a journey of survival, of learning, and of change. At the end of his presentation, Benji shared a hopeful message. Despite humanity's tumultuous history, Earth had developed cultures of resilience, empathy, and a drive to find peaceful resolutions. He described how in recent years, humanity had turned toward diplomacy, cooperation, and unity, fighting battles not on fields but in conferences, seeking solutions not in conquest but in understanding. "We're not perfect," he said, his voice steady, "but we've learned, sometimes painfully, that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to build and protect." As he finished, the room was silent, the weight of his words settling over the alien students. They'd come expecting to hear tales of brutality, but instead, they'd witnessed a species whose conflicts were as complex and nuanced as their will to endure. For the first time, they saw humanity not as a primitive people, but as a resilient one, a species whose journey, marked by both horror and hope, had taught them lessons that perhaps even the stars themselves could not.